Welcome, IT changemakers, to the Dex Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
When shall we three meet again? Now, that doesn't really work because it's of course a Macbeth reference to the Weird Sisters, the three Weird Sisters. And we are not three Weird Sisters joining you today. We are three, if you will, Weird Brothers. Welcome to the Dex Show. I'm Tom McGrath. I'm here with...
You're an honorary brother, Catherine.
Well, Catherine's the producer. And so, but thanks for acknowledging her presence, Alan. But it does.
Did she disappear in real life then?
You spoilt my intro a little bit. It wasn't a very good intro anyway. Let's be honest. But you know, the basic idea of it is because we are back on the Dex Show with Alan Nance, and you know he is of course the prophet of proactive IT, the diviner of Dex. We turn to him whenever times look shadowy and we want to peer more clearly into the future. Alan, welcome back to the Dex Show. It's a delight to see you again. How are you?
It's great to see you too. No, it's great. No, these are busy times, as you said. You know, they're turbulent times. They're busy times. We thought the pandemic had brought us to troughs of despair. Turns out it was one of the minor hindrances on the way to a much bigger crisis.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you both the question. Right? You can answer first, Alan, as the guest, and then Tim. Sure. If you had to guess when the three of us last spoke, month and year, what are you guessing?
Well, I would think it's about a year ago, isn't it? I would think it's probably about a year ago.
It feels to me like a little more than a year, maybe early 21, January, February.
I believe December 2020.
Really?
December 2020. Different world.
I was a month off.
There.
I was only a month off.
Yeah, you were pretty spot on there. Time's passing a little quicker than you think, Alan. That's the update there. But you're all about the future, Alan, not the past. You know?
I am. I do not dwell, Tom. I do not dwell.
There you go. And are you well, Alan? Are you good?
I'm excellent. I'm in good spirits, in good health. As you know, I live in Florida now, which served me extremely well through all of the pandemic, to be honest.
Yep.
And now, you know, it is, as I said, it's a very exciting time. And I think that's one of the reasons we are getting together to talk about these exciting times and specifically what it means and what we need to do about them. I think that's really, isn't that why we're getting together, Tom?
This is why we're getting together. You have absolutely nailed the reason. But let's start with a brief look over our shoulder all the same.
Sure.
What just happened, Alan? We seem to be moving quickly out of the period known by many as the Great Resignation, as the kind of defining force in determining the dynamic between employers and employees, and because of that, technology to some extent, right? I mean, how do you understand this phenomenon from the last year or two in terms of its origins, its significance, etc.?
I think that we have to focus on the big picture for me. And what we tend to do is we rally around events, and if we don't put the events in the context of the general transition that we're on in society, we tend to over-imagine, over-subscribe to the effects of a single thing. And I think for me, and it's been this way since the late 1990s, we have been on a journey from the service economy to the experience economy. And that journey has had a number of acceleration points along the way. 2007, it was the iPhone and the App Store, and now the pandemic. But we're going to have another one now because we're going to also get an opportunity to look at the impending economic crisis in a different way. And so every time we look at these things, we need to go back to what has changed from a service economy to the experience economy. And one of the things we know about the experience economy is it's enabled by mass consumerization. And the mass consumerization is giving us this ability to make different choices, to have more insights and have different choices. So on the one hand, you've got, for instance, the gig economy. So we now have access to understand what jobs are available where and how much they're paying. And through the pandemic, we had the opportunity to experiment with different ways of working. And so I think those two things have led to what we call the Great Resignation. I also think the Great Resignation is coming to an end. I think it will be over by November, because the economic crisis is going to impose constraints on that freedom. Fear will impose constraints on that freedom that will mean the end of the Great Resignation. It doesn't mean we aren't in the Great Retain, which is kind of a different thing, but I don't know. That's my opening gambit.
It's a cool opening gambit. So again, just casting our eyes back very briefly, one last time before we plow on into the unknown.
Yeah.
What did the period of Great Resignation mean specifically for IT? Honing in, what aspects of IT's role did it flesh out?
Well,
which did it accelerate?
I think one of the things it definitely accelerated for me was people understanding the importance of employee experience for the wrong reasons, right? So when you're faced with attrition, and you're faced with attrition in certain core services that you are required to provide as an outsourcer, as IT services, then you have to focus on what's going on. The second thing is, I actually think we may have set ourselves up for huge pain in November, because when I was talking to a number of CIOs at a SIM conference in Boston, and a number of them were telling me that their reaction to attrition was what I would call service economy reaction, which was to bump the wages massively. And one of the CIOs was telling me they had to raise the salaries of their service support people in Manhattan by up to 70%. And the point I raised then is, what are you going to do in November when you don't have the Great Resignation, but you will still have 70% salary inflation that you now have to justify in some form of productivity. And what you also see is a lot of the pandemic spending. I was talking to one of the large pharmaceutical CIOs. They had basically a mandate to do what was necessary to keep the company during the pandemic. Now they want their money back. Now they're saying, okay, we've got to return to normal now. Now we need to get back to regular budgets. So I think some of our reaction to the Great Resignation is actually setting us up for a very, very difficult time November onwards.
So, Alan, first let me say, if you don't adopt and trademark the DEX profit, I am.
One of it was the diviner of DEX.
What is it?
The diviner of DEX.
The diviner of DEX.
The proactive IT profit.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out
before we went. So you can both have it. Fight over it.
But Alan, for your specialty, that DEX and XLAs, was it a perfect storm over the last couple of years? And I'm curious specifically for IT workers in this resignation. A lot of IT workers changed roles, changed jobs. Was it because of the pandemic? Was it because of perhaps their own DEX or XLA for themselves was dropping and forced them to make changes? And then secondarily, do you think we're at the beginning of the Great Regret?
Well, you've got a lot of questions in there, Tim. I think all of those things are obviously true. I think there are people that when they were separated from their physical work environment, they discovered that what they liked about their work was actually the work environment and wasn't the work itself. So I think a number of people thought, you know what, I don't really like this work. So this is not something I want to spend my time on. I think that was part of it. I think part of it is opportunism. I mean, if you can get 50, 60% more by doing the same job somewhere else, I think there's a lot of opportunistic efforts that surround that as well. But I do think that people have been frustrated for a while with some of the tools they've had to work with and some of the stress that's been put upon them, especially in the sport world. And I think people were trying to escape that. And this seemed to be a great opportunity to do it. I mean, we still have a shortage of labor. As I say, I think we'll see that change by November, as companies have to compensate for the inflation that they're going to have to absorb. They're not going to be able to pass it all on. There's going to be a return to productivity. There's going to be more constraints. It's going to be very interesting to see what choices people make. So I don't know if there's going to be a great regret yet. I think the great regret is probably going to come from the side of the employers.
Right.
About the way in which they have attacked the problem which has been throwing money at it, and a combination of what I would say traditional service economy measures, those will not stand in November. That's my expectation. And then how that works out with the employees, I don't know.
So let's keep looking into that crystal ball. What does the next year or so look like? And to keep with the great, the quote unquote great moniker, is there going to be a great reversal? Or are we seeing maybe an expansion of, you mentioned the gig economy, where there's maybe less employer loyalty and more career mobility? What's the next couple of years look like?
I think that's very likely, and I think also that there's a real moment of truth here for executives, right? So one of the advantages of being an elder in any organization is that you've seen more than anybody else, and the fact that you've seen more than anybody else should make you more susceptible to identifying patterns. And any way moving forward is always a combination of patterns, possibilities, and pathways. Now, when I look at this, and this is why I'm very confident about where this is going, because I grew up in the 70s, I know exactly what's going to happen in November. But here's where it goes wrong. Patterns are the prerogative of elders. Possibilities are the prerogative of your diverse employee base. And so if you want to make the right choices and follow the right pathways, you cannot extrapolate the patterns that you knew into the actions that you took. You have to extrapolate the patterns that you see into new actions that are going to be more successful given the fact that you're now in the experience economy. And when I look at certain executives, I mean, Goldman Sachs is a great example, they don't get it. So they are extrapolating past patterns and they're extrapolating past behavior. I think the people who are going to get it are going to identify the patterns correctly, but they're going to have a different approach to solving those patterns. And one example I would say, and I've said this before, is hybrid is a noun and not a verb. And a verb and not a noun. So when people say we're going hybrid, if they think about a physical environment, a physical combination with processes and approvals on when you're doing what, then they are thinking in terms of the service economy. If they are thinking about a moving target that is going to be configurable and is going to be mass customizable with lots of micro experiences that are going to give lots of benefit to the customer, then they're in the service economy. So the same pattern cannot lead to the same actions as when you originally saw the pattern. Does that make sense, or am I being too complicated about it?
No, I think it makes perfect sense. Doing business, executing your whatever it is you do requires some level of repeatability, and I think the pattern conversation makes perfect sense, and it kind of ties into what I wanted to ask you about IT in general. My sense is that the business side of an enterprise has largely figured this out, but IT traditionally is impacted by departures because those patterns and those executions of IT, they rely traditionally or heavily on institutional knowledge that is in people's heads. And there's a big impact when one or more people leave because they may be single person dependent or they haven't done the right level of training. What's the implication then to IT with these departures, and how do they maybe figure out how to avoid that?
Well, let's also do a benchmark of where we are, right? So Tim, you and Tom and I and a whole bunch of other people live in a bubble where we are seeing a move from the service economy to the experience economy, and we understand that has a lot to do with digital experience, and that has a lot to do with automation, has a lot to do with observability of end-to-end processes. One of the things I learned when I was at the SIM conference was we are in a bubble. And I was talking away, and I was talking about, moving from SLAs to XLAs, which is clearly one of my themes. And somebody put their hands up, and they were from a fairly substantial organization, and they said, we don't have any SLAs. Does that mean that we can't do XLAs? Does that mean we can't move forward? So I took a pause. Now, you're not going to like this. And I asked people in the room, I said, how many people here have heard of NextThing? Nobody. How many people in the room have heard of Happy Signals? Nobody. Okay. How many people who do not have SLAs? Half the people.
Wow.
How many people do a help desk? About 20% of the people. So the other challenge that we have on the influencer producer side is to understand that we're dealing with a wide range of understanding and maturity. And so some of the questions we ask ourselves are very good questions, but they are somewhat ahead of where a lot of people are right now. And that's really scary, because then I'm wondering, as I talk to people, I mean, I'll give you another anecdote. I presented at HDI Support World Live last November in Orlando. And I had about 50 people turn up. And most of the people turn up wanted to know, what is an XLA? What is experience? Why should I care? I did an update to that presentation in July in Support World in Las Vegas, and I had well over 150 people in the room, and most of them were there because their boss had told them they needed to figure out what they needed to do about XLAs and what they needed to do about experience management. So in the space of like 7-8 months, there's been a massive shift. And where is that shift? That shift is actually in the technology departments. Now I'm going to take that roundabout question to what you really asked him. If you're now in a department that you are enlightened, that you see the way forward, that you know that we need to get to XLAs, we need to get to digital experience scores, we need to get to end-to-end observability with sentiment attached to it, and you're sitting in a place with no help desk, no SLAs, I think that's a call to action, and you need to move. And so I think you're going to see also a clash between the different levels of maturity and the reactions to that. Because if you don't know where you are, then clearly you don't know where you need to go. And so you're going to end up stuck in making decisions around things that you know. And as you said, Tim, the fear of movement. So if I'm dependent on the one smart person who runs my configuration management, for instance, I'm going to try and hold on to them because I don't have any other strategy than to leverage their knowledge to keep going. If I have the best service desk person in the world, I want to hold on to them. It doesn't mean that they think they're happy being that best service desk in a poor performing organization. They want to be the best service desk employee in a good supporting organization. Yep. So I think you're going to see a lot of that reflection happening. And I think people are going to use training courses, seminars, conferences as a way to figure out where they are, going back to your gig economy. Where am I on this scale, and where do I need to be? I get people calling me up saying, my company isn't ready to invest here, but I really want to be engaged in this. Where can I go? What can I do? Or I had a call with an insurance company, and they're like, we all want to do it, but our boss doesn't see the value of it. What can we do? These are breeding grounds for unhappiness.
Right.
That's so interesting, Alan. I mean, I kind of reflecting a lot of a moment on, the dynamic that the Great Resignation created, particularly if we were in the business of promoting decks and XLAs and such like, was, look, suddenly employee retention is so important. What can you do to provide a better experience to your workforce, to try and play your part in keeping them productive, keeping them content? And that was kind of like a very congenial context for us to operate in, right? For us to present this technology. Now the new context is almost reversed, right? Because suddenly we're going to have anxiety about retaining, everybody's anxiety about their position, everybody's anxiety about their economic future. And within that, when we think about the IT professionals who are deploying decks and who are using decks and who we want to use decks, I mean, is it a question of saying, look, we can allow you to do a lot more with less resources, less colleagues potentially, but you can be much more effective in your role and therefore much more secure because of the reach and visibility that this technology gives you. Do you see that as the kind of hinge?
I think I would put the context differently though. I think what people need to understand is in the service economy, when you hit a wall, an economic wall, what would you do? You'd cut travel budgets, you'd cut training budgets, you'd cut back on headcount, you'd freeze vacancies. If you do that now in the experience economy, I think that's going to be an absolute disaster for you. But what you still need to do is you still need to get productivity. You still need to get increased revenue. You still need to maintain market share. So the context of the XLA and the context of your DEX has to be a business economic value. And that business economic value, you're going to have to spend some work understanding that. But what I'm worried about, as I said, a lot of people identifying the pattern from the past and then going immediately to the solution from the past, which is going to drive good people away, which is going to lower the customer experience, the employee experience, and the supplier experience, and which is going to lead them to a really bad hole. Whereas the tools that we're giving them are perfect to be used in a different way, to identify different sources of value. And I also think some of the XLAs are going to change. So some of the XLAs we're using now are extended from observability, and which is bottom up. But I think we need to do more XLAs that are top down. I mean, I did some work recently with Weston Morris of Unisys, and we were talking about an XLA for meetings. What would an XLA for meetings and collaboration start to look like? Another one is an XLA for an onboarding process, an XLA for a recruitment process. I think we need to sort of move these XLAs from the inside to the outside, have more outside-in conversations. But the tool sets that we have with Qualtrics, with NextThink, with Happy Signals, and all of these other tools that we have available to us, Medallia, give us an opportunity to apply new possibilities and new pathways to old patterns. And that's where I want to see executives waking up and not putting it on autopilot and saying, "Oh yeah, here's our cost-cutting playbook." Which could mean let's get rid of NextThink because NextThink's a cost. We don't need NextThink. That would be a disastrous decision to take.
Completely agree.
I mean, I think I was going to ask you at this point, Alan, about sort of the DEX and XLA sort of hype cycle, but I think we've covered that pretty thoroughly here. What I'd like to ask you instead, to conclude this discussion for the moment, right, is as we try and anticipate exactly how things are going to develop over the next year or so, what indicators are you looking to over the next couple of months that you think are going to point in one direction or the other, and what do those directions look like? I know it's a challenging question to throw at someone, but I suspect you're going to give me a good answer anyway. That's what I think.
Well, I'm going to ask the first one. I'm going to ask the question you didn't want to ask, because if you look at the hype cycle, the hype cycle,
we can do that too. Yeah, that's cool.
Now, one of the things I think is important on the newest, the July hype cycle, XLAs have moved ahead of DEX, which is interesting, but they've moved into that pinnacle of confusion, market confusion. So what we're going to see is a lot of people are going to come at this with very different understandings of what it is and what it needs to do for them. And then we're tipping into that valley of despair. We're almost catching up with SRE, where people say, well, we've done all this and we've got nothing out of it. So, all this hype, where's it going? So I think, first of all, we have to work together to set and manage the expectations and keep people on track to focus on the value that XLA's experience management decks are going to bring. I think that's absolutely essential for us as influencers in that market, that people don't lose their way in all of the noise and the confusion of the hype cycle. I think that's one thing. And now what was the second thing? What was your second question again?
It was like when we try and figure out how things are going to develop over the next few months. Yeah. What are the indicators? What are the key indicators that you're looking to that you think are going to determine that direction, and what do those potential alternate directions look like?
So I want to talk about DEX in that respect, because DEX in its original form is what I would call an extended capability. So you take the end-to-end observability, and you know that even without DEX, I'm a big fan of NextThink for what it does in end-to-end observability of the value chain, even if you didn't have a sentiment score. And then we've added the sentiment score to it, which gives us the sentiment score of that value chain, that service value chain that we're looking at. I think DEX is more important than that, because I think as you move your XLA to be closer to the employer, the supplier, and the customer, the DEX score becomes an important indicator to the bigger XLA. which means that it can have a more substantial role in identifying business economic value, but beyond productivity. Does that make sense? And I think that's where we have to work. Not everybody's going to be ready to consume that. Not everybody's going to even understand that. But I think that's one battle, because the more we can show business economic value beyond productivity, the more we can show that relationship to employee experience, supplier experience, and customer experience, the more we're going to help pull the other people through that hype cycle curve.
I mean, I think that's a great point to end on, Alan. And I think anybody who's tuned in to know something of our potential futures is going to be pretty glad they did so. It was a pleasure catching up with you, Alan. Let's check back in what, 6-8 months, something like that, and see how things have panned out. What do you think?
January, when we've gone through. Summer holidays are over, the reality's hitting everybody, the new budgets are starting to be formed around November, depending if you've got a calendar year or an April year. By January, you're gonna know whether I'm right or wrong on where we are. And we're also going to have early indications of whether people are responding in the right or the wrong way to that, and what that's going to mean for them.
Yeah, we can't wait 18 months for that conversation, Alan.
Well, no, because I think people are going to need help making that move. I mean, I'm just going to take you down one rat hole, and you don't have to include this in the session. But it's interesting that Toys R Us are relaunching.
Right.
And there's a huge debate going on about whether they are relaunching the old formula, which is doomed to failure, or have they learned about the experience economy and they're now moving into creating an experience for children and parents. And I think that's another example of the old world moving to the new world. The people that are successful will take all of the learnings, all of the experience, all of the investment that they've made, but they will be doing it in a different way to create and manage fabulous experience.
Love it. So we're going to direct anyone who wants to keep their finger on the pulse of these fast-changing events over to the Dex Show Dex Hub mothership. And let me tell you, as soon as we've signed out from this episode, I'm going to be joining Alan to get us a written contribution there. So if you want to hear more thoughts from Alan, do head to the Dex Hub right away, and we will see you next time. Alan, thanks so much for coming back to the Dex Show. It's been great to see you.
Thanks for chatting with you. It's always great chatting with you, Tim. Thank you.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.